Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, wheat is the big topic at Merschman Seeds as we get closer to fall harvest. Dylan shares updates on things to keep in mind this time of year for wheat fertility and more. Ben shares a precipitation anomaly map and talks about how rainfall can impact yield potential. He also shows a corn heat stress threshold map from Elwynn Taylor. And how can a cricket tell the temperature?
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben and Dylan's going to start with wheat, right?
Yep. Wheat is definitely a hot topic right now as we get closer and closer to harvest and into the kind of the growing season for most guys. Brings up a good starting point of I think where we should start on our fall fertility. Heading into spring. I know it's a long ways away, but it sets your foundation as guys are starting to get fertilizer prices and stuff starts to go. So kind of want to focus on your main NPK first. Get that good base. Roughly 30 actual pounds of nitrogen is what we kind of want out there in your fall mix to get going. And just give it a good start, and then we'll come back later with our other nitrogen passes, either that be a 1-pass or a 2-pass program there, and then just the normal 80 mix of P and K.
Well, that's what I just was sitting there on my phone pulling up because, you have it right there. What do you got in front of you on that one?
Well, I think the key thing to remember, you don't need a lot of nitrogen in the fall because you're just trying to establish the base. You're not trying to feed the straw. So you want a good root system to survive winter and just enough to get it going. And then in the spring is where that critical nitrogen, that green up time is what produces the quality and the test weight. Because if you get excessive growth in the fall, you can have problems with winter kill.
Yep.
And wheat has to vernalize. If you're not familiar with that term, it has to go through so many days of cold weather in order to joint, in order to go ahead and produce the head. So that's why winter wheat, it has to go through that cold spell before it will joint in the spring. So if you put a ton of nitrogen on the fall, you can put more, but you'd have to graze it, keep it short. And a lot of people do graze wheat in the fall as long as it's not muddy. So if you got cattle, you can get some pasture if you need it with wheat and get another use out of that wheat. And actually cattle eating the wheat can actually improve the tillering of the wheat. So wheat has so many different dimensions that besides just grain and double crop, but the fall pasture is another thing that some farmers use. And again, if you are fall pasturing, you can plant earlier because if you have problems with Hessian fly laying eggs, the cattle are eating them. So then the new growth won't have those eggs. So there's some really unique things you can do. So you can plant even earlier than the fly-free date. And Hessian fly is kind of like the corn borer of wheat. In other words, it lays its eggs in the fall, they hatch, and then they go right up the stem. So anyhow, just a little tidbits that I've learned over the years from agronomists that I've worked with.
Yeah, one of the things I did is I pulled up winter wheat on the Ag PhD fertilizer removal app, and I plugged in 130 bushel acres on the winter wheat side. If you have adequate levels of fertility and you don't want to go backwards, we need 63 pounds of phosphate. We need 37 pounds of potassium because that is what the grain is going to remove. We're going to get some help from nitrogen mineralization on the nitrogen. That takes 150 pounds just in the grain alone. Now, if you're in a completely deprived soil that hasn't seen fertilizer and it's been mined, you're probably going to need a little bit more than that to help support both the straw and the grain. From the total pounds removed, if you got rid of all of the straw and all of the grain off that field, you're looking at 83 pounds of phosphate and 193 pounds of potassium. So guys like to plant wheat because of the straw. And one of the reasons that can be beneficial and that does work cyclically is if you're putting the manure from the animal that you're using as the bedding back on that field. But if you're just doing it from a pure cash standpoint, be careful because 156 pounds of potassium is in the stover, and when you remove 156 pounds, that's got to be replaced at some point in time, otherwise you are mining it off. So we know that potassium is important for stalks, stalk integrity, leaves, all of those things. That's what potassium is in the plant for.
What about sulfur? When do you want to put that on?
So I'm typically a spring sulfur guy. I don't think you're influencing as much tillering potential. Ideally, you're probably looking at a 1-to-5 ratio between nitrogen, 1-to-7, kind of depends on how you're feeling on things. But If you are applying 30 pounds in the fall, I probably just skip it. So it's one product. You don't have to go through the blending process. But if you wanted to put on divided by 5, that would be 6 pounds.
Yep.
And but I'm really more focused in the spring on the sulfur side of things, because sulfur is part of the protein build of the grain portion of it. So for 100 bushel wheat, I'm kind of, if you're applying 80 pounds of nitrogen, I'm somewhere around 15, 16, 17, 18 pounds, maybe even up to 20 if you really think you're chasing high yielding wheat. But like I said, I probably focus on that one and more in the springtime, using ammonium thiosulfate mixing with your 28 or 32.
And the phosphate's the most critical element of those potash, but phosphate's really important to that root development. And what you want to do is build a really, really healthy plant to get through winter. And winter is, don't forget, wheat always has 9 lives. I don't know how many people have said, oh, my wheat's not going to make it. Basically about the only thing that can kill wheat in the winter is too shallow of planting. How deep should we plant, Ben?
At least 1.5 inches.
Yeah, at least you want that crown to develop lower in the soil. And it's ice. Ice is the critical thing. If it smothers out, again, lack of oxygen, you're not going to have wheat the next spring.
Correct.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, now that we got the fertility piece out of the way, the one thing we're making a lot of noise with our Peyton and our hyper early wheats. We're getting calls of guys that have never planted wheat before. What the heck do I do? I don't have a drill, or I only have a 15-inch row planter. Well, we'll show up a picture, but 15-inch row wheat has done really well for guys, and it seems like they keep doing it. We did it in Fort Madison 2 years ago. We dropped 900,000. This is when we first found out of, we first tested Peyton in a real scenario besides plots, and it really took off at 900,000 seeds with a 15-inch planter. That was done at the John Deere vac bulk fill, and we can really monitor that the population that we're going after. But if we're using a planter, like you only have a ground drive Kinsey, for example, we might have to take our time to set it and go. Just put in 100 pounds and evenly across those rows, or one in each bulk tank, and rely on your acre meter and really see how far you're getting along to see what population you're at, because most of the time you're probably not going to get a very good reading off of your monitor, just the way the ground drive kind of operates.
Yeah, so at 100 pounds per acre and figure 10,500 seeds per pound, you're roughly going to get over an acre and a third, probably.
Yeah.
Something along those lines, because I think I did the math earlier. It was like 83 or 82 pounds per acre at 10,500 at 900,000. So when you do the math that direction, if you need more than an acre, if you're closer to needing 2 or 3 acres to get yourself checked in on it, go ahead and put 200 pounds in, figure out where you're at on your acre counter compared to when you run out, and then you just take that percentage and then adjust your population from where you have it to where you want to be based on that percentage difference, and that should get you pretty darn close to where you want to be at. It has happened where I've had customers plant and they get 60% on, and they're like, well, what do I do? I said, well, go back with 40%.
Do you have to make any modifications to the planter to plant wheat versus soybeans and corn?
No, just the only thing would be the meter, or your disc, your cell plate for both. I'm not so familiar on the ground drive side of things, like what we had a customer do a couple years ago. But like if you've got a vac planter, it's a vac plate from John Deere, cell plate, and you just changing your monitor exactly what you're doing going to wheat, and set your population to what you're wanting to go after.
The good thing about a 15-inch row planter is you're getting your depth much better than what a drill will do, and you're getting in your delivery of your population. So you get some pluses there. Yeah, you wish it was a little bit narrower, but 15-inch rows work quite well.
And two, if you're going to have a lot of residue, I think 15-inch row planters would do a better job than a disc or a drill. That's it's just scratching the surface, trying to get through. Most of the time, if you're going to have row cleaners to get that trash out of the way, get good to seed to soil contact there. Because if I just ran a quick example, so if you planted in 15-inch rows at 900,000, and if you had 11,000 seed count, you'd be 82 pounds an acre, 1.64 bags. Now, if you're going to drill it at 1.25 million, for guys that are on the lower side of that threshold, be 114, so you'd be at 2.27 bags. So it's a little over a bag difference, half a bag difference per acre going one way or the other. So,
yeah, and we raise 130 bushel wheat in Fort Madison 2 years ago when we did it. It's hard for me to see the differences, and maybe it would have been 10% higher. You know, could we have had another 10 to 12 bushel an acre? Maybe, but for the convenience and you know, not having to get a drill out, being able to, most guys on their 15-inch planters are at least 30 foot, if not 40, or even wider than that. You can really get the acres covered and get the wheat in the ground.
Yeah, and one last thing, because if you're worried about tillering when it comes to that stage, we can do that in the springtime, you know, with double shots of nitrogen, you know, more up front, and then come back later with your last half. So there's ways to go around the tillering part if that's, you know, your big worry. I only have 900,000 out there. I'm used to, you know, 1.25, 1.5 million. That's where you can make that up.
And we've seen with reduced stands because of trash is a word that's coming to mind, but fodder issues.
Street residue.
Seed to soil contact. Right?
Correct. We've seen where I'm looking at 50-60% stands, and growers keep it, and they still end up making close to 100 bushel an acre. So these new varieties are not your grandfather's varieties. They are extremely dense tillering products, and they seem to handle the lower populations better than what the products that are a little older.
Yep. That's all I've got.
A lot of phone calls on Peyton.
Yep.
A lot of phone calls. Growers that have not raised wheat. I think I'm not averaging 4 a day like I was, but maybe Lynn's averaging 4 a day. But I'm still doing 1 or 2 conversations a day talking about wheat, how to raise it, and what the advantages of it are.
You know, like we said last episode, you know, the price right now of wheat we're not looking at $5 wheat. We're looking at wheat, you know, pushing $7. So
what did you say?
Yeah, right now at our local, what we call our local bid across the river and into Illinois, cash right now you can get $6.67, and we're still at a negative 60-cent basis.
Wow.
So on the board futures, we are over $7.
So that helps. Yield helps, and utilizing your equipment. You know, like say you can use you buy a planter which costs a lot of money. You can use it twice a year rather than once a year, and so a lot of advantages. And of course, you know, we're really excited about our Peyton 2 wheat for the northern areas to double crop for sure.
Yep.
What came across my desk this week is this graph that came from Eric Snodgrass, and I think this was filmed at the end of last week, maybe the beginning of this week. And I've had the question, so this is just well-timed information. How much is too much rain when we are at this stage of the game in the soybeans? So this graph, what you're looking at is a precipitation anomaly and how above or below average rainfall affects yield when we are looking at the R3 to R6 growth stage, approximately 85 days to 115 days after planting. So where he has this marked, and I'm not sure where this data comes from, but he usually uses really reliable sources, at 1.2 inches above average, we typically see our best yielding soybeans during that pod fill time when we're filling. So if our average rain in the month of, or in that time frame is, call it 4 inches, and we get 5.2, that's really when we see these yields that are at least a bushel 0.2, or when we see these yields that are trending above trend line or average. Where we start to see things drop off fairly significantly or start to turn below average is when we get 5.2 inches above the average rainfall for that area during R3 to R6. So that would mean, again, 4 inches of rain is average during that time frame. We would be at 9.2 inches instead of that same scope. So how much rainfall have we had? What's the caliber, and what does that actually look like? The next graph, or the next image that I have to show here, is the last 30-day departure from normal. So this probably isn't going to hit that R3 to R6 perfect, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea on who's too wet versus who isn't wet in that value there. So when you're looking at this graph, all that you got to do is know that the darker the blue, the closer we are to 5 inches of rain, which matches his 5.2 over the anomaly, and that's what these are. These are departure from normal, so above or below average. And there's a lot of areas basically going across Interstate 80 and through Indiana that are pretty dark blue, and they potentially could be off the charts. I know a few areas in Indiana, probably here moving through Illinois, that are above average. And why would that be agronomically, that we are extra rain above and beyond, it starts to impact yield. Well, the first thing that I think about is if we are in saturated conditions for an extended period of time, the bradyrhizobia will die off. They have to have oxygen. They have to have that symbiotic relationship with the soybean for that soybean to release the sugars to the bacteria, and for the bacteria to turn atmospheric nitrogen into ammoniated nitrogen for that soybean plant to uptake. So too much rain is definitely going to inhibit the amount of nitrogen, and when we inhibit the amount of nitrogen, that is going to pod fill. That is a negative thing. Soybeans are very protein heavy. They're protein dense seeds, and in a protein dense seed, nitrogen is a building block for proteins, nitrogen, sulfur specifically. So when we aren't uptaking the amount of nitrogen, it's going to have a detriment. The same thing can be true. We need a lot of potassium during pod fill.
Yep.
We need phosphate during pod fill. If the root system isn't allowed to breathe, it's also not going to be taking nutrients in for that fill time frame. R3 to R6 is R3 to R6 is what his graph was talking about. R3 is when we basically have a small 3/16 of an inch pod at the top 4 nodes of the plant. R6 would get to be where we have the seed is enlarged to the point where I believe it's like a 1/4 inch or maybe slightly larger than a 1/4 inch. So basically we have an itty bitty seed versus a bigger seed, and that's where that stage is at for the time frame that he's talking about.
It's almost when the soybeans are touching each other in the pod.
Yep.
So when you get a pod and they're almost touching each other, they're so fat they're almost. That's R6.
Yep.
Because R7 is when the next stage will actually see a slight tinge of yellow on the pod. Is that fair to say?
Yep. And basically that's where we're at right now. We're probably in full R6, and we're experiencing this deluge of rain. And now hopefully we don't see it negatively impact, but I believe there's areas that are starting to set themselves backwards. There's areas in soybean fields that we very rarely see in August that are going backwards because they're too wet. We're starting to see yellow pockets start to show back
low
up.
spots.
Yeah,
Spots.
if you're mowing the grass, you know where the wet spots are.
Yeah.
And it's just water standing, and I'm sure those spots are where we're going to lose that yield. But there's other areas of the field that could probably manage that kind of water, and so it's going to be an interesting thing. But we normally don't think of rain in August as a negative. Where it's, I'm telling you, 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was worried about a dry fall. Too dry, not to finish, because it was a year ago we just didn't have any water in August, and so now it's the opposite. So now, what are we going to see on yields? I don't know. I mean, you would think that would help, but if there's an inch of water sitting on top of the ground, we're in trouble.
Right. And I've been out in a couple of cornfields. I mean, I guess I haven't been today. We got 1.5 inches of rain last night, but things have been better than I would expect from a muddy standpoint. So, hopefully it's either getting off or it came so fast that we only had really, half of what came, because if it came in a 20-minute period, most of it ran off in that same time frame. So,
and our ground was in need of moisture too.
Right. So the other map that I've shown here before from the Nutrient Warning Minute is the corn heat stress threshold, and who has passed the 140 stress degree day yield loss line. Now, this 140 stress degree day comes from Elwynn Taylor. This is something that I remember him saying a decade ago back.
Iowa State
meteorologist.
Yep, meteorologist and extension director.
Yep. So Elwynn Taylor came up with this, and he said anytime that we have a large area in the Midwest, this doesn't necessarily affect Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, the Mid-South, the southern states, but anytime that we have 140 or more stress degree days, we have a very hard time getting a trend line yield. So we should expect a below trend line yield in those areas. Now, I kind of feel like the bearer of bad news with the last two topics that we're covering here. But you can see this diagonal line that's got a black line on it there that shows basically northeast Iowa versus southwest Iowa, and basically that diagonal that cuts across. Who has seen the most amount of stress? A lot of that has to do with who's had the rain, who hasn't had the rain-cooled air, allowing for less stress degree accumulation. And how they measure that is if you have a high of 86, so anything that doesn't affect the growing degree unit because it's maxed out past that growing degree unit, so let's say it is 90 degrees. So on Tuesday was 90 degrees, we would have accumulated 4 stress degree units for that day. So if we have 140 of those accumulated, it's very hard to get an above trend line yield. So
that's for the year you're talking about?
Yep, that's for the year. So very interesting map. I will be very, very curious. It looks like Lee County, Iowa, here is kind of sitting in this itty bitty little bubble where we might have had a little bit more rain, so therefore our temperatures didn't get quite as high, quite as fast. So that cloud cooled weather has kept us a little bit cooler with some of the rains that we picked up. But it's going to be very interesting as we drive up 136 and see who has above APH versus who has lower than APH based on what stresses that we've seen throughout the growing season.
Yeah, and July is the month that really hammered us.
Yes.
On the stress.
And part of that has to do too with, I gave a presentation this morning talking about we have had a record warm July. And when we look at the record warm July, it actually comes from the overnight temps being anomalously high. We have not had, if you just compare the high temperatures for the day, not the high minimums but the high maximums, we have actually been kind of middle of the road, maybe a little bit higher than middle of the road or a little bit above average for the overall record highs for the day, but it's the nighttime temps that have pushed us across the country into a record warm July. And that's where a lot of this stress comes in as well.
And soybeans, for the most part, they like heat. So they may respond to July better than what the corn crop did.
And this is specifically related to corn. This 140 is specifically related to corn, not necessarily soybeans. And, when I'm scrolling through Facebook this time of year, everybody and their dogs posting pictures and, retailers, elevators, everybody is posting pictures of ears. There's a lot of tip back. Yep. And I'm not talking... I'm seeing a lot of pictures of tip back. I'm not seeing significant tip back, but what I would expect from having warm temperatures at night and something that would aid in the back to this 140, because we're seeing probably 3 to 4 rows missing. So 6 bushel per row of tip back. That's probably where the Pro Farmer Crop Tour and some of these other things are showing maybe not record yield as what USDA was projecting.
Well, like last year. I mean, I think we still got. I always ask farmers, and I think you're still going to have to get the combine out this year. So I think we're a far cry from a crop failure, but we've had these stresses, and and it takes off a little bit of the icing on the cake, you might say. But I still think when we get all said and done, I think we'll have a good crop. But right now the markets are telling us. Maybe not so. Maybe a little less. So, like say, the USDA might be a little bit high, and they start adjusting those numbers backwards. That's going to be built into the market, it looks like.
Yep.
So it's creating some opportunities. Anytime something bad happens, it creates an opportunity. So as a farmer, you have to look at, okay, what's going on? What's the opportunity? And then, we really won't know until the combines start rolling. And we'll know soon because our southern customers, are going to be doing corn shortly here.
I would imagine within the next week and a half, 2 weeks.
So
and that's Southern Illinois, Missouri. I think some of the guys in Tennessee and Kentucky have already fired up. So
it's going to go fast here, that's for sure. Anything else? Well, I usually do the jokes, because seed company back in the 30s used to put a joke on each page to get people to turn the page. Well, this one's not a joke, but this one here, if you want to impress your grandkids or your younger kids, this is: have you ever? I'm going to tell you a way. We're going to put this up. And this came from John Felt from Blue Water Forecasting, and he says, have you ever used a cricket to tell the temperature? Here's how you do it. You count 14 seconds, and then you count the number of chirps you hear in 14 seconds. And then you add that to 40, and that will give you the temperature, relatively speaking. So this would be a great little thing to do with the youngsters and folks and see what the temperature is. But we were talking about, we're probably going to have 2 people, because you're going to have one person watching the stopwatch and then one person doing the counting. So anyhow, here's a little tidbit to impress the youngsters about how you can tell the temperature just with a cricket, okay? So some of my jokes, okay? A couple of them have to deal with ice cream, and I love ice cream, okay? But this one here, how can you tell if you're really out of shape? I mean, how do you know? Well, you can tell by you're out of shape if you're halfway up a flight of stairs and you have to set up base camp and try for the summit another day. I sent that to Amy Niver from Rosen's because she climbs mountains and she thought it was kind of funny. So it passed her test. Okay, I don't know about you, but I just had my physical this past week, and I'm not kidding. I had my annual and found out that I have a rare disorder. My body doesn't produce its own ice cream. It's called an ice cream deficiency syndrome. So I have to supplement my ice cream levels every day. I don't know if you knew that or not, okay? We're gonna go with that. But I have a little bit of science behind it. Ice cream is clearly essential for survival because dinosaurs didn't have it, and you see how that worked out for them, okay? There you go. All right. Now, this one here reminds me of the farmer. Now, I know for the most part, every farmer I know, they're very conservative. You know, they really don't like to spend money. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I look up to them for that, okay? This morning, I took my suit to the dry cleaner. They said that'd be $25. I said, for $25, I'd rather give it to charity. So I donated it to the charity shop next door. They cleaned it, pressed it, put it in the window. Then I came back and I bought it for $5.50. Technically, I just got a $19.50 discount for being charitable. Now, doesn't that sound like a true farmer? Always different ways to accomplish the goal, right? I thought that was kind of interesting. But anyhow, thanks for watching today. We hope your family is healthy and safe, and we'll see you next week.